Hello, everyone. And tell me, what do you believe is the greatest, most enduring mystery of the deep sea? The piers of Severomorsk bristled with the cold air of late autumn, a biting wind whipping off the Barents Sea and carrying the scent of diesel, salt, and industry. Beneath the perpetually overcast sky, the diesel-electric submarine Pallada, K389 of the Northern Fleet, sat low in the water, her black hull a blunt, powerful shape against the grey concrete. Crewmen in heavy coats moved methodically across her deck, securing lines, running final checks, their breath misting in the frigid air. Below, in the cramped, humming confines of the control room, Captain Anatoly Ivanov monitored the final readiness reports being relayed from each compartment. He was a man in his late 40s, face etched with the perpetual weariness that came from years spent beneath the waves. But his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Beside him, Executive Officer Pavel Kuznetsov, younger and outwardly more energetic, though equally seasoned, ticked items off a printed checklist. Engine room reports all systems green, Comrade Captain, Kuznetsov stated, his voice calm and professional. Sonar and radar checked and calibrated, torpedo tubes loaded and secure, battery state of charge, nominal. Ivanov nodded, his gaze fixed on the depth gauge even while tied to the pier. It was a subconscious habit, a constant reminder of the environment they were about to enter. This patrol was slated to be a relatively routine one, 2 months operating in designated areas of the Barents and Norwegian seas, conducting exercises, monitoring foreign naval activity, and practicing evasion tactics. Nothing particularly groundbreaking, nothing overtly dangerous by the standards of their profession, but the Barents in November was unforgiving. Icy swells, unpredictable weather patterns, and depths that plunged dramatically just north of the continental shelf presented their own set of challenges. In the fore-torpedo room, Seaman First Class Viktor Petrov, barely 20 years old and on his first long patrol, double-checked the watertight integrity of a loading hatch, his movements precise despite the nervous energy buzzing beneath his skin. He thought of his girlfriend back home, the hurried, whispered goodbyes on the pier, the promise to write whenever possible. Communications from deep patrol were sporadic at best, often limited to coded bursts sent from antenna depth. His bunk in the crew quarters felt smaller than ever, a narrow shelf in a steel tube shared with a dozen other men, their lives packed into duffel bags and small lockers. The Pallada wasn't the newest boat in the fleet, launched in the early 1980s. She had seen her share of refits and upgrades, but she was a kilo class, known for being quiet, reliable workhorses. Her hull bore the scars of previous patrols, minor dents and scrapes acquired over years of navigating treacherous waters and brushing against ice flows. The air inside was thick with the smell of electronics, lubricant, and the faint, ever-present aroma of recycled air and human bodies. Every surface was utilized, pipes snaking along bulkheads, equipment mounted wherever there was space, wiring harnesses bundled neatly overhead. There was no wasted space, a testament to the engineering required to put 100 men and powerful machinery inside a pressure vessel designed to withstand crushing depths. The crew, 96 strong, was a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh faces like Petrov, their lives bound together by steel, water, and a shared, unspoken understanding of the risks inherent in their work. They were a community, a floating village operating in a world hostile to human life. Kuznetsov announced, "Ready to cast off, Comrade Captain." Ivanov took a deep breath, the recycled air familiar in his lungs. "Very well, Comrade Executive Officer. Cast off lines. Make ready to get underway." The order rippled through the boat. On deck, The last lines holding Pallada to the shore were released. Tugboats nudged her away from the pier. Below, the powerful diesels rumbled to life, sending a low vibration through the hull. Slowly, the Pallada began to move, gliding silently away from Severomorsk, turning her bow towards the vast grey expanse of the Barents Sea and the unseen depths that awaited. The few figures left waving on the pier dwindled to specks, then disappeared entirely. For the men aboard, the world was shrinking to the confines of their steel vessel, their reality defined by the gentle roll of the boat and the hum of machinery. The patrol had begun. The first week at sea settled into the familiar rhythm of submarine life. The world outside the hull ceased to matter, replaced by the constant monitoring of internal systems, the execution of drills, and the endless cycle of watches. Pallada submerged south of Bear Island, descending into the perpetual twilight zone where sunlight could no longer penetrate. The transition from the choppy, grey surface world to the silent, pressure-filled realm below 100 meters was always a profound one. On the surface, they were a vessel vulnerable to weather and detection. Submerged, they became a hunter, or the hunted, cloaked by the ocean itself. Inside, the atmosphere remained largely unchanged thanks to sophisticated life support systems, but the sense of isolation intensified. The boat became a self-contained universe. Viktor Petrov adjusted to the close quarters, the constant low-level noise, and the demands of his duties in the torpedo room. He learned to sleep through the sounds of pumps and machinery, to navigate the narrow passageways even when the boat was at a steep angle. He shared quiet conversations with the more experienced hands, learning the unwritten rules and lore of submarine service. Meals were served on plastic trays, surprisingly good given the limited galley space, a welcome break in the routine. There were drills for fire, flooding, emergency surfacing and silent running, rehearsed until they were second nature, muscle memory ingrained through repetition. These drills were not theoretical exercises. They were rehearsals for the potentially deadly realities of their environment. Captain Ivanov spent hours in the control room or in his small cabin reviewing charts, studying intelligence reports and consulting with his officers. He trusted his crew, but the ultimate responsibility for the boat and the lives of 96 men rested solely on his shoulders. Every decision, every maneuver carried potential consequences. Kuznetsov kept the operational schedule running smoothly, a constant presence overseeing departments, solving minor issues before they became major problems. There were the usual minor technical glitches, a temperamental bilge pump that required more attention than it should, fluctuating voltage in a non-critical circuit, a stubborn seal on a hatch that needed extra effort to secure. Nothing alarming, just the expected wear and tear on a complex machine operating under stress. The boat proceeded northeast, heading towards their assigned operational box, an area known for its deep trenches and challenging acoustic conditions due to varying water temperatures and salinity layers. These conditions could be both an advantage, providing cover, and a disadvantage, making detection difficult even for their own sonar. Lieutenant Commander Smirnov, the sonar officer, was particularly attuned to the nuances of their environment, spending hours listening to the faint sounds of the deep, distant surface ships, marine life, and the subtle acoustics of the ocean floor itself. The mission involved monitoring specific sea lanes and conducting covert surveillance, a delicate game of cat and mouse requiring extreme stealth and precision. They practiced silent running, minimizing all noise aboard, a state where even dropping a wrench could compromise their position. During these periods, the only sounds were the essential life support systems and the faint, rhythmic pulse of their own sonar in passive mode, listening to the world outside. The depth gauge read consistently over 300 meters, often dropping towards 400 or more as they traversed the varied topography of the seabed. The pressure outside was immense, measured in tens of atmospheres, a constant invisible force pressing in on the hull, a silent reminder of the thin margin for error. The crew settled into the long patrol, their minds focused on the tasks at hand, the world of land, family, and normal life receding with every meter of depth they gained. They were, for all intents and purposes, inhabitants of another planet, one made of steel and water. Pallada reached her primary patrol area, a region characterized by dramatic seabed topography, deep basins, steep slopes, and scattered underwater mountains. It was an ideal location for their mission, providing both cover and vantage points for monitoring surface and subsurface traffic. The depth here frequently exceeded 500 meters, sometimes dropping towards 700 meters in localized trenches. Operating at these depths required vigilance. While well within the boat's design limits, the pressure was immense, constantly testing the integrity of the hull and all penetrations. The routine continued. Watch rotations, drills, maintenance. They spent extended periods at silent running, the crew moving like ghosts through the boat, communicating in whispers or hand signals. Lieutenant Commander Smirnov reported fleeting sonar contacts, distant propellers, seismic activity, the clicks of sperm whales. Nothing that suggested immediate threat, but a constant reminder they were not alone. Captain Ivanov ordered a series of complex maneuvers, testing the crew's ability to navigate the challenging terrain and maintain stealth. There was a brief moment of concern when a reading on the depth sensor spiked erratically during a deep dive, but it quickly stabilized, attributed to a temporary software glitch, or perhaps a thermal layer affecting the sensor's reading. Minor issues like this were noted in the log but didn't warrant significant alarm. They were part of the everyday reality of operating complex machinery in an extreme environment. Life aboard the Pallada maintained its internal rhythm, a world apart from the surface storms that might be raging overhead, or the geopolitical tensions playing out thousands of kilometers away. Birthdays were celebrated quietly with a slightly larger portion of dessert. Letters home were written to be transmitted during a brief, secure burst when conditions allowed. Hopes focused on the halfway point, then the return home. Communication with Commander Shaw was strictly controlled and scheduled, typically consisting of short, encrypted bursts transmitted when the boat rose to antenna depth or utilized a towed buoy. These bursts contained essential operational updates, position reports, and status checks. The schedule dictated a status report transmission every 48 hours. On the day of the last scheduled transmission, the Pallada rose carefully to periscope depth, her antenna mast breaking the surface for the few critical seconds required to send the burst and receive any waiting messages. The transmission was successful. A standard report confirming their position, operational status, and personnel count. Commander Shaw received the short, coded signal. It indicated nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary. It was a routine confirmation from a submarine on a routine patrol. The boat then descended back into the depths, returning to her silent vigil. Acknowledgement of receipt was sent back from shore, also a standard automated burst. This was the last confirmed communication from K389, Pallada. The time was 14:17 local time on November 22nd. The position reported placed her within her assigned operational area, in a region where the seabed lay approximately 600 meters below the surface. Inside the submarine, unaware that this would be their final contact with the outside world, the crew continued their duties. Viktor Petrov was on watch in the torpedo room checking pressure readings. Captain Ivanov was reviewing the upcoming patrol plan with Kuznetsov in the control room. Lieutenant Commander Smirnov was listening to the faint sounds filtering through his hydrophones. It was just another moment in a long patrol, indistinguishable from the thousands that had come before. The ocean outside remained vast, cold, and indifferent. The next scheduled communication window came and went without a signal from Pallada. This wasn't immediately a cause for panic. Delays in communication were not uncommon. Equipment malfunctions, unfavorable atmospheric conditions, or tactical reasons, like avoiding potential detection during a critical maneuver, could all account for a missed burst. Initial assumption at Northern Fleet headquarters in Severomorsk was one of these routine issues. The operations desk logged the missed check-in and initiated standard procedures. A coded message was sent via multiple channels, attempting to solicit a response. A simple, low-power signal that the submarine should have been able to receive if she was within a certain radius and at listening depth. There was no reply. A few hours later, another attempt was made, this time with a stronger signal, still adhering to protocols that minimized the chance of revealing sensitive information. Still nothing. Unease began to spread through the command center. Duty officers exchanged increasingly worried glances. Captain Dmitry Volkov, head of submarine operations planning, no relation to Seaman Petrov aboard Pallada, reviewed the sub's last reported position and intended track. He checked the weather reports for the area, moderate seas on the surface but irrelevant for a submerged boat, and reports of any unusual activity in the region. Nothing seemed amiss externally. A direct communication attempt was made via secure satellite link, a method less stealthy but necessary when standard bursts failed. This signal was directed to the Pallada's known location, a direct call. It went unanswered. As the delay stretched past 12 hours, the situation was escalated up the chain of command. Admiral Nikolai Rostokov, commander of the Northern Fleet submarine forces, was notified. A veteran submariner himself, Rostokov understood the many reasons a boat might temporarily go silent. But he also knew the unforgiving nature of their environment. He ordered a broader, though still guarded, query across relevant naval assets in the area. Surface ships were asked discreetly if they had detected any submarine activity. Maritime patrol aircraft were alerted to include specific acoustic searches in their flight paths. Still, the silence from Pallada was absolute. No emergency signal, no locator beacon, no acoustic signature detected by distant hydrophone arrays. It was as if the submarine had simply ceased to exist. At the 24-hour mark, with no contact or trace, the situation moved from communication delay to potential vessel distress. The families of the crew, scattered across Severomorsk and other towns, had received initial standard notifications about a communication delay, a routine part of long patrols designed to manage expectations. Now, however, naval liaison officers began making visits, the tone shifting from reassurance to guarded concern. It was a subtle but terrifying change for the wives, parents, and children waiting ashore. Admiral Rostokov convened an emergency planning session. Based on Pallada's last reported position and operational profile, a potential search area was being calculated. It was a vast, three-dimensional box encompassing thousands of square kilometers of ocean surface and hundreds of meters of depth. The resources required for a search of this magnitude were immense. The possibility of a catastrophic event began to loom large in the minds of the naval staff. A fire that couldn't be contained, flooding that overwhelmed pumps, a collision, or a structural failure. Any of these could happen suddenly, leaving no time for a distress signal. But the complete lack of any trace was deeply unsettling. Even in the case of a catastrophic event, debris, an oil slick, or at least a locator beacon should theoretically surface or be detectable. The silence from Pallada was not just a lack of communication. It felt like an absence of reality itself. The grey skies over Severomorsk seemed to mirror the growing dread within the command center. The routine patrol had transformed, hour by hour, into an unfolding crisis. The question that no one dared voice aloud yet was forming in every mind. Where was Pallada? With 48 hours past since the last communication and no sign of Pallada, the situation was formally declared a missing submarine. The scale of the response escalated dramatically. Naval vessels operating in the Barents Sea were immediately diverted to the designated search area. This included frigates, destroyers, and specialized hydrographic survey ships. Maritime patrol aircraft, equipped with magnetic anomaly detectors, MAD, and sonobuoys, expanded their search patterns over the vast expanse of water. The calculated search area was based on Pallada's last reported position, her speed and course, and the potential drift if she were disabled on the surface or slowly sinking. It was a massive grid, complicated by currents, water depth variations, and the simple immense size of the ocean. Search patterns were meticulously planned, dividing the area into sectors, assigning assets, and coordinating efforts to avoid gaps while maximizing coverage. Sonar operators on the surface ships worked around the clock, towing arrays and dropping sonobuoys, listening for any acoustic signature that might indicate a submarine hull, even a crippled one. Aircraft flew back and forth in precise patterns, using MAD gear sensitive enough to detect the large metal mass of a submarine beneath the surface, and dropping sonobuoys in carefully spaced grids. The silence was deafening. The hydrophone arrays spread across the seabed, designed to monitor submarine traffic, were reviewed with intense scrutiny for the time window around Pallada's last communication. They recorded countless hours of underwater sound, distant ship noise, seismic rumblings, marine life, but nothing that could be definitively linked to the K389. No explosion, no implosion sound signature, nothing resembling the hull noise of a distressed submarine. The lack of any debris was particularly perplexing. Even a rapid sinking or explosion at moderate depth would typically leave some trace. Oil, scattered components, life rafts, if there had been any attempt to abandon ship, though this is exceedingly rare and difficult from a submerged submarine. The deep water in the search area complicated everything. If the submarine was on the seabed in 600 meters or more, it was beyond the reach of conventional divers and required specialized deep submergence vehicles, which were few in number and slow to deploy. The pressure at those depths was crushing, making any potential rescue operation virtually impossible if the hull was compromised. For the families back in Severomorsk, the waiting was agony. The guarded optimism initially offered by the Navy evaporated, replaced by grim-faced officers providing sparse updates in sterile conference rooms. Media attention converged on the port, turning a private tragedy into a national story. Reports speculated wildly on potential causes: collision with a surface ship, internal explosion, even collision with a foreign submarine, a recurring, often unfounded fear. Naval officials released minimal information, citing operational security and the ongoing search efforts. Behind the scenes, however, the mood was shifting from search and rescue to search and recovery. The time limit for survival, even in a scenario where the hull was intact but the boat disabled on the seabed, was measured in days due to limited air supply and battery power. As each hour passed without contact or sign, the hope of finding the crew alive diminished. The vast, cold Barents Sea, usually their element, had seemingly swallowed the Pallada whole, leaving behind only silence and a growing sense of dread. The search continued with increasing intensity, but the sheer scale of the ocean and the complete absence of any clue made it feel like searching for a single lost needle in an infinite, dark haystack. The extensive search efforts continued for another week, then 2, spanning thousands of square kilometers of the Barents Sea. Surface ships towed their sonar arrays back and forth across designated sectors. Aircraft crisscrossed the skies, dropping sonobuoys, but the result was always the same. Nothing. No acoustic contact resembling a submarine hull on the seabed. No magnetic anomaly. No debris field. No oil slick. The ocean yielded no secrets, only its usual symphony of natural sounds. Hope, which had been dwindling, now seemed extinguished for all but the most optimistic. The phase of search and rescue officially transitioned, albeit quietly within naval circles, to search and recovery, though the official objective remained locate the vessel. Resources were beginning to be reallocated. The intensity of the surface and air search, which was costly and resource-intensive, began to scale back. Specialized deep water search assets, like remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, and autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, were considered, but deploying them effectively required narrowing down a potential location, even to a specific seabed feature which they lacked. The sheer depth of the water in the likely area of disappearance, averaging over 500 meters, made any visual search from the surface impossible and any recovery operation immensely difficult, even if the wreck were located. Theories about the Pallada's fate, initially discussed cautiously within the command center, began to be debated more openly among experts and in the media. The most plausible scenarios were those that explained the sudden, silent disappearance and the lack of debris. The complete absence of any signal, even an automated distress beacon designed to activate upon sinking or hull breach, pointed towards a highly sudden and destructive event that incapacitated all systems instantly. The deep water of the patrol area was a critical factor. Any incident occurring below a certain depth would be compounded by the external pressure, increasing the likelihood of a rapid, catastrophic failure. The inquiry board, formally convened by the Navy, began its exhaustive review of Pallada's history, maintenance records, crew training, and the specifics of her last patrol. They pored over the minimal data available, the last communication burst, the reported position, the environmental conditions in the area. But without the ability to examine the wreck itself, their work was largely theoretical, relying on analysis of probabilities and potential failure modes based on the submarine's design and operational history. The search area remained under passive acoustic monitoring, hoping against diminishing hope that some faint signal or new piece of evidence might eventually surface. But as the weeks turned into a month, the grim reality solidified. The Pallada and her crew were lost. The mystery of their disappearance, however, was only deepening. The official inquiry into the loss of the K389 Pallada was conducted behind closed doors, a somber and painstaking process. A board of experienced naval officers and technical experts was tasked with determining what happened, a formidable challenge given the complete lack of physical evidence from the vessel itself. They began by meticulously examining every scrap of information available. Pallada's full service history was reviewed. Construction logs, refit records, maintenance schedules, reports of previous incidents or recurring technical issues. While not a new boat, she had undergone her scheduled maintenance, and there were no records of persistent critical flaws that would inherently doom the vessel. Minor issues, as were typical for any complex machinery, were present in the logs, but nothing that pointed definitively to a pending disaster. The records of the crew were scrutinized. Training histories, medical reports, disciplinary records. Captain Ivanov and his officers were experienced and highly regarded. The crew, while containing younger, less experienced members like Seaman Petrov, was considered competent and well drilled. There was no indication of human error being a likely primary cause, at least not an error that would lead to such a sudden and untraced loss without any attempt to mitigate it or send a distress signal. The specifics of the last patrol were reviewed repeatedly. The planned route, the operational objectives, the known environmental conditions in the patrol area, depth profiles, potential currents, acoustic conditions. Experts simulated potential scenarios based on the boat's design parameters and the environment. Could she have struck an uncharted object? While possible, it would likely cause damage rather than instantaneous untraced sinking unless the object caused a rapid breach at extreme depth. Could a sudden, violent malfunction in a critical system, the propulsion, the trim and ballast system, the electrical plant, have occurred? Yes. But most failures would allow some time for the crew to react, even if unsuccessfully, and potentially trigger an alarm. The focus kept returning to scenarios that were both sudden and catastrophic, leaving no window for response. The possibilities of a massive internal explosion, battery or weapons related, or an instantaneous hull breach at depth remained the most likely explanations for the complete silence and lack of debris. A battery explosion due to hydrogen buildup during charging, though rare with modern safety protocols, could be incredibly violent. A torpedo or mine detonation within the tube or magazine was another horrifying possibility, though security measures against this were stringent. Either event, particularly at the operational depths. Pallada was known to reach, would likely result in the pressure hull being compromised, followed instantly by implosion as the sea rushed in, crushing the vessel. This process would be measured in milliseconds, destroying the boat and scattering its components. The search area was re-evaluated based on these scenarios. If the boat was destroyed at depth, where would debris likely settle, considering currents and the topography? Deep water acoustic surveys continued periodically, listening for any ping from an activated emergency beacon, unlikely to survive a catastrophic event, or sounds associated with a wreck settling. But the ocean floor in that region was vast, complex, and covered in thick sediment in many areas, making passive listening incredibly challenging. The board considered the possibility of a collision with another vessel, perhaps a foreign submarine operating covertly in the same area. This theory was highly sensitive and explored with utmost discretion. While such collisions have happened, they typically leave some evidence, either on the colliding vessel or debris from the damaged sub. No such evidence had surfaced, and no other nation reported any incident involving their vessels in the area. As the inquiry progressed, the grim reality solidified. Without the wreck, without the black box data recorder, if it even survived a catastrophic event, and without any survivors or physical evidence, reaching a definitive conclusion about the cause was proving impossible. The board could only analyze the probabilities and propose the most likely scenarios based on the limited data and expert knowledge. The emotional toll on the inquiry board members was significant. They were dealing not just with a technical failure, but with the loss of 96 colleagues, friends, and countrymen, knowing that the families were desperately seeking answers they might never be able to provide. The investigation could analyze systems and procedures, but it could not pierce the veil of silence that had fallen around Pallada. Months turned into a year, then several. The official search for K389 Pallada was formally suspended, the vast expanse of the Barents Sea yielding no definitive clues. The inquiry board eventually released its findings, a lengthy and technical document that, despite its thoroughness, could not provide the certainty the families craved. The report concluded that the Pallada was lost with all hands on or around November 22nd, likely due to a sudden, catastrophic event at operational depth that resulted in the rapid loss of hull integrity. The precise nature of the event and the exact location of the wreck remained undetermined due to the complete lack of physical evidence. The most probable causes were listed as a massive internal explosion or rapid, uncontrollable flooding leading to the vessel being driven below crush depth. The report detailed the meticulous review of the boat's history, the crew's records, and the search efforts, highlighting why various potential causes were considered and why no single one could be definitively proven. It was a conclusion born of analysis and probability, not concrete evidence. For the Navy, the loss was a profound tragedy, a stark reminder of the inherent dangers faced by those who serve in the silent service. Safety protocols were reviewed, training procedures were examined, but there were no obvious systemic failures identified that could be directly attributed to Pallada's disappearance. Only the acknowledgement that operating complex machinery under immense pressure in a hostile environment carried unavoidable risks. Memorial services were held in Severomorsk and other towns where the crew had lived. The names of the 96 submariners were read aloud, their sacrifice honored, their absence deeply felt. A memorial stone was erected overlooking the bay where Pallada had last sailed, a silent testament to the lives lost beneath the waves. But for the families, the lack of a final resting place, the absence of wreckage, left an open wound. Without a wreck to visit, without understanding precisely what happened, closure remained elusive. They were left with questions that echoed in the silence left by their loved ones. Did they know what was happening? Was it instantaneous, or was there a brief moment of terror? These were questions the ocean refused to answer. The mystery of the Pallada became part of the lore of the Northern Fleet, a cautionary tale whispered among submariners, a reminder that even the most advanced vessel and experienced crew were ultimately at the mercy of the deep. The search area is still occasionally scanned by passing vessels, prompted by new acoustic technology or the faintest hint of a possible contact. But decades later, nothing resembling the Pallada has ever been found. The Barents Sea holds its secrets closely, the cold, deep water serving as an eternal tomb for the 96 souls aboard K389.